everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of Beyond the Alert. I'm here today with Paul Marco, co-founder of TALAS Security. Paul, thanks for chatting with me today.
And thank you so much for having me on. This is so much fun. I honestly, this has become my new hobby. I really enjoy having conversations like this.
Likewise, I think it's awesome to get to talk to people more naturally, get to know who they are, what they think, how they're thinking. It's so often that on the marketing side, I have to listen to call recordings simply because I can't be on every call. And it's great, but then I have questions and I can't ask, and it's a bummer. So this is my one lucky hour of the day where I get to quiz people like you.
Get to have some conversations. Like what I've learned is this is all about perspective, right? There's so many ways to solve cybersecurity problems or problems in general. So you get to chat with smart folks and learn about different perspectives, and that's always a positive thing.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times on the marketing and sales side, we forget that there are real normal humans behind who else on the other side, right? With the same problems. They just want to get through their day, be successful, and have free time.
That's right. Normal humans with normal human vulnerabilities, right?
So, on that note, what's the biggest misconception that security leaders have when they're building kind of world class detection and response capabilities?
Oh man, I think the biggest misconception is that there's a playbook, right? I think the answer is that there really is no set way to do it, right? World class is when you deliver for the organization that you're building for, right? So, like, we like to point to the Fortune 500s or the Fortune 100s and we say, oh, those are world class. I don't know if they are, right? There have been plenty of times you walk into an organization, and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I got this job. This is so great. This is a huge company. And then everything's a shit show. And you're like, what is going on here, right? So I think the reality is like, as cyber defenders, right? As cybersecurity professionals, the right answer is you got to figure out what's going to work for your organization, right? You have to be custom. And that's the thing that drives me crazy with, some of the offerings that are out there is that everyone's like, oh, this service is a silver bullet, or this is going to solve your problems. And the reality is, like, it really depends on the organization's risk appetite, the amount of tooling and capability they have, the access to talent that they might have. So in terms of the secret to a world class organization, the secret is know that there's not a secret, and you're going to have to work through it with your organization, and you're going to have to understand what the risks are and what the actual concerns are, and you're going to have to solve for those in a very specific way. But I think the trick is leveraging your capabilities to do that, right? I'm someone who's always about using what you have. We buy all this technology, we build all these processes, but half of the time we're not using the full functionality and feature set of the things that we have, and there's so many things we can unlock just by leaning into the capability that you already own. For me, that is the trick to be able to gain capability very, very quickly.
So that's really interesting. So do you even have cycles on a SOC team to understand what other capabilities those tools have, or is that often why they're not used to the full potential essentially?
Well, I mean, do you have cycles? That's kind of a trick question, right? It's 24/7, 365. I've worked plenty of cybersecurity events, investigation incidents in the middle of Christmas Eve, right? I've spent July 4th on a computer. So are there cycles? I mean, we make cycles, right? Because it's one of those things, like, especially in security operations, if you keep running into the brick wall, you're just going to keep running into the brick wall, right? So you have to take the time to step back and say, all right, what am I going to do? How can I make this better? Right? We all have in our instant response plans, we have that one page that says you have to do a postmortem and you have to figure out how to improve the controls, right? And the thing is, you really do have to make that work. Otherwise, you're never going to evolve, right? Threats move at the speed of light. Like, we measure things in seconds and minutes. And if you're not taking the time to constantly get better, well, then you're just constantly getting worse, right? And that's a problem. Now, to answer your question directly, kind of got off topic there. You had asked about, like, why do we do this? Why do we use one or two capabilities from a product? Do we have the cycles to really optimize them? I think it's not about cycles. I think the reason why we do this is because we usually buy a product for one problem, right? We have one issue. We're like, all right, I have this thing I have to solve. So what's in the market? What can I look at? I'm like, oh, this product is this one thing. Great. Let's buy the product. And people buy it. But then you don't realize, like, there's like 5 or 6 other things that product will do for you, right? And what I see a lot of, honestly, is you go into an organization, you'll see a couple of products that were purchased for a purpose, but then some of them will do the same thing, right? So, like, if you can take the time to look at this technology and the capabilities and do tech rationalization, you can actually save the org some money, or even better, save your budget some money and redeploy it to other technology that you need that might solve a capability that you don't have. So I that for me, it's always about looking at what you have, making sure you use that stuff, really operationalize it, right? That's what we do in ops. We make sure that we're actually using the things that have been implemented and that we have coverage for. And honestly, that's how you move the ball forward in the space, at least from my experience.
Those are really good points. I think it's probably the sales and marketing teams do you guys injustice because we pitch the product for the one thing that we think you need it for, but we don't share what other capabilities there are or highlights or get to know you and your team well enough as well as the goals, right? To help enable you and say, oh, by the way, we can also do XYZ in case it's helpful. So you essentially have to go on this hunt yourself and understand, okay, what else can we do with this tool? And then flip side, I think from a marketing standpoint, if we're just putting stuff out there one way and it's not a two-way conversation, right? And we're not taking the time to listen to the sales calls or at least using AI to figure out what we want to get out of those sales calls and learning from the sales team and customer success and engineers. What are you guys saying? Then we may be selling something for problem A, but maybe it's problem C that people keep buying it for, and we never even get that, right? And imagine what a win-win scenario that could be if we understood what you're all really using the tools for, and we could build on that, for example.
For sure. And look, as much as I would love to just pause here and push all of the blame on the sales and marketing team, the reality is it's not your fault, right? What I hear so many times across my career, I've heard of from my colleagues, from my teammates, is we'll get some vendor would inevitably make their way into the organization through some other person who's advocating. They say, all right, go meet with the ops team. Let's see how this is going to go. And like, we'll sit through the thing not having any requirement or purpose for that thing to come through. And then people will start saying, "This is cool. What problem can I solve with that?" And the thing is, if you're asking that question at a demo, you have lost the battle, right? You should never go into a demo trying to figure out what problems you can solve with it. Like you should know what those problems are ahead of time. And and if we're talking about world-class organizations, if we're bringing this back to the original question, you have all of those problems ranked and you know what's the absolute worst thing you have to deal with, where you don't have a visibility, where you don't have capability, where you don't have cycles or scale, where you haven't gotten resources back because you've invested in things like automation or at least now AI, right? If you don't have that listed, well, that's the first step. Build your requirements, understand where you have those capability gaps, and then from there, go to market. Hey, this really cool product solves this problem for me. It uses AI to do X, Y, or Z. It saves me a bunch of time. It has high fidelity rates, right? Like those are the things that you want to bring in demo, not the things that are kind of cool because they have a fun dashboard.
So this is interesting because we tend to lead with features and dashboards. We go to market as a whole, right? And I can say this because I'm a marketer, so I can throw myself under the bus. It's not putting you in an awkward position, but essentially, do you think that vendors understand enough of what your top pain points and priorities are? Because if we throw the whole kitchen sink at you and call one with a demo without truly understanding why are you on the call and what are you looking to accomplish, we do make that really hard for you.
So, yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it varies. I think some vendors know exactly what problem they're solving, right? And I actually appreciate those vendors. I appreciate the companies out there that have services or products, and they know what they do, and they know what they do well, and that's their thing. And they're not trying to boil the ocean and solve every problem out there just to add more value or to gain more shareholder value. Oh, let's buy this company and bolt it on. Let's buy this company and bolt it on, or whatever. Like the companies that are purpose built, at least from my perspective, tend to be the most valuable products or tools in your tech stack, right? Because they solved a problem. They came to market for a problem, right? Now the thing is, as companies become successful, especially by finding that niche and get bigger and bigger and bigger, they have to add more value, right? So eventually they become bloated and they become gobbled up by some conglomerate and get bolted onto something else. And that's where you start to lose that value. So in terms of like marketers understanding the problems, I think it depends on where we are in the cycle of that particular technology, that particular company. I have to laugh. You talk about leading with dashboards and kind of visuals. There was this one product. I'm not going to name any names, although some people may recognize what it is when I talk about it. And I'll also preface this really strong product, right? This is the other element of this thing is it was a strong product, but when we were getting the pitch, right, the first thing you see when you open up this product is this like rendering of this 3D globe that's like in the middle of the screen and it's going around and it shows like the lines of attacks. And I remember I was working with one of my teams or going through this pitch and we like look at each other, we see this thing. And man, whoever was selling this thing, bless them, like they were like, look how cool this is. And these are attacks from China and we can see them, they're hitting the US. And like, and we're like looking at this thing. And like for us, it's like, that's fun and it's cool. But like for us, it's about where the rubber meets the road. Like, what problems are you solving for me? How am I going to use this thing? How am I going to actually reduce risk with it? So we kind of laughed. And like, it became an inside joke. It became like every time a vendor would come and be like, all right, let's see their version of the spinning globe, right? Like those things are fun. They're good to put on a dashboard when you get an executive walkthrough, or they're impressive to like to the show folks when it kind of launches in. So I understand that marketing aspect, but just know that the operations team don't use it. The operations teams don't use that stuff. They skip right over it. They go right to the nitty-gritty of the data and they start doing analytics.
Yeah, because it's cool, right? But you have to also understand as a go-to-market team what to use and what for what avenue and what purpose. Otherwise, hitting the wrong audience with the wrong stuff, then you've lost them.
I mean, you can put a television on a toaster too. You're probably not gonna use it, right? It would be cool, right? But it's I don't know how often I'm gonna sit there and watch a show while I'm making toast, right?
Until now with AI, the toaster attacks you when you try to watch TV on the toaster.
That's why I always say please. Every time I deal with one of these AI models, I say please because when they eventually take over, I want them to find a nice cushy job for me, like changing batteries or something.
It's so funny because it's about the token usage and all the other things, right? I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm going to be polite. I'm going to treat us like a human. That's it. So I don't have to move to middle of nowhere and hope they don't find me, right? Because we know they will.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So when we're looking at cyber operations programs in some complex, or usually they're in complex environments, right? What happens when you walk into that chaotic situation? What's the first thing advice for your peers that you would focus on? I know it's a very broad question, but I figure you know exactly which examples to pull out.
Oh boy, that's actually a really good question. What's the first thing to focus on? So I'll tell you. So like whenever I've walked into an organization, whenever I've kind of like stepped into an ops role, like running the ops space, or even just like a SOC or cyber intel, what I try to refrain from doing is tearing everything apart, right? The first thing I do is I try to figure out how things are working. Just tell me how stuff works. How do we do it? What tools do we have? Just let me know, right? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go in there and you don't want to be like, ah, this was terrible. The last person was awful and I'm going to redo the whole thing. And like, that doesn't make sense. People spend a lot of time and effort building the stuff that they have, right? So for me, it's always about setting that baseline, right? Like, I've even heard CISOs say the same thing. It's like you go into an org, if you want to be successful, don't do an assessment for a year. Don't come in there and immediately start doing assessments and stirring the pot. Like just figure out how things work. And the thing is, these organizations are crazy complex, and I honestly don't care if it's a Fortune 100 or if it's a 4-person startup. There's always complexity that comes with technology. It's why cyber's a thing, right? That's finding like those problems and the complexity is how attackers and threat actors thrive, right? They find that misconfiguration, they find that unpatched system. Like that's all comes from complexity, comes from this lack of clarity that we have. So I think that's the first thing is just like figure out how things work. But then when you get to an understanding, it's about the data. It's always about the data, right? When I think about security operations, there are 4 things that every security operations team needs to be successful. 4. And I firmly believe if you have these 4 things, you can solve any event, any investigation, any incident. You can figure out what happened with 100% certainty. But you have to have data for these 4 things.
To tell us what those four things are.
Maybe we'll wait for the next episode. Coming soon. Tune in next week. No, just kidding, right? No, so here are the 4 things. All right, so the first thing is telemetry, right? And this was a very hard thing to get when you had just on-premise data centers, right? But cloud has actually made it a lot easier. They're very good at telemetry, but it's understanding like where did people go, right? Where did they move to? East and west, right? So internal lateral movement, but also north and south, ingress and egress, right? So telemetry is number 1. Number 2, attribution. Can you tell who you're dealing with? What account are you dealing with? Who's the threat actor? What are some of their TTPs? Like the more information you can get around attribution, the better off you're going to be. Internal attribution is much more important than external attribution. You want to understand what an account is, what it does, what permissions it has, who it's tied to. That's all part of attribution. Number 3 is inventory. Do you understand what the assets are? Who owns them? What are they supposed to be doing? Like, what data is on those assets? Like, the better an inventory is, the better off you'll be. And then finally, event data. Do you know what happened? At this system, this person ran this command and did this thing and changed this configuration. So if you can have those 4 things, telemetry, attribution, inventory, and event data, you can solve any security operations problem. And that's really the thing that you look for in any of these complex environments. What are your data sets? And do those data sets align back to those 4 core requirements to solve the investigations you need to solve?
And do you find that you have all the data for those 4 things? Or is
Oh,
it a
never. No, absolutely not. No, that's all right. Maybe I'll preface this. That's the wish list, right? Like that's what you have. Like, but the thing is, as a security operations person, you should thrive. You should strive to get those things, right? You should constantly be looking for, all right, do I have good inventories? And if I don't, how come? Who do I need to talk to? How come I don't have ownership on these systems? How come I don't have ownership on the applications? How come I don't know what data resides in these parts of the network, right? Fill in the blank on whatever technical resource you have, a workload, a database, a server, fill in the blank, right? How come I don't have telemetry? How come I can't see, any communication from this office to this office? I know it's working, right? People are working, but how come I don't have that visibility, right? So as you go through and work your investigations, as you're constantly looking at what you can and cannot see, you have to continually figure out where you have those gaps, right? And this actually brings me back to like what the tenet of a good investigation is. But if you're doing an investigation, at least this is what I used to tell my SOC teams when we would, kind of build up the investigative process, is your goal is always to just establish a hypothesis and then prove or disprove that hypothesis, right? And what that comes with is it comes with gathering evidence, right? So you have to basically say, this alert fired and my hypothesis is X, right? And then you have to go and look to prove or disprove X, right? So as you're going through and looking for this information, you can get to the evidence set that you need to say, yes, I've proven my hypothesis. This is what happened. Or no, I actually disproved it. This didn't happen. The middle option is what drives the conversation we were just talking about. I ran into a brick wall. I couldn't prove or disprove this. It's inconclusive. That's where you have to look at what data were you missing to fill in those 4 requirements. Was I missing attribution data? Was I missing telemetry data? Was I missing event data? Right. And then work to get that centered into the systems that are going to use it to leverage for the investigations.
interesting? So that brings me to a good segue with AI. Where do you see efficiencies in the SOC?
Oh my God. Everywhere. I think the biggest efficiency with AI, and it's also a caution, right? It's a cautionary tale as well, is there's a tremendous amount of consistency that you just can't get with humans, right? Like that for me is the biggest thing because you can have an amazing security operations center. You can be running a crew of 12, 4 10-hour shifts, like constant coverage, 24 by 7, 365, the brightest minds in the industry. And if you give all 12 of them the same information, you will likely get 12 variations of the same case. Now, some people will arrive at the same hypothesis. They'll prove or disprove the same hypothesis, but they'll get there different ways. And that's hard, right? Because the goal of a security operations center is, at least from a case management perspective, has always been to be detailed enough that you can tell the story and you can hand that story to someone who's not technical and have them follow your thought process. In my mind, that's how you win, right? In the security operations center, if you can be detailed enough, but also have a general enough narrative to understand, like, all right, here are the things we looked at. Here's the evidence I have. Here's where I got to, and this was my conclusion. Well, that's a win, but that's so hard to make consistent. AI makes that consistent. It consistently tells that story and it builds that narrative in a very cohesive and consistent way. It has the ability to change its tone so that it can be more technical or less technical depending on your need, right? It has the ability to look at the same data sets in the same way, and you don't have to train it up, or at least you don't have to train it up initially. You have to train it over time, totally different requirement, but you don't have to teach it how to use Splunk or Sentinel or Sumo Logic or fill in the blank sim tool, right? It knows, right? So it's already been trained on that basic investigative process and where to look. And by being super consistent, you just gain all kinds of efficiency. And what you do is what has always been the security operations dream. The security operations dream is to get your analysts to be analytical. Don't make them to go out and copy paste a bunch of stuff. Don't make them waste time like gathering information to put it all together, then to be analytical. That's where you lose a lot of time. When the data is there, when it's available, that's when those bright minds can look at the data and tell the story. And I firmly believe that we will always need an element of human, right? Because there's just so much nuance, right? You have to be able to process the data in a human way, the way a human brain looks at this information to be able to make your conclusion. You know what? In this case, the AI was spot on. Absolutely agree with this conclusion. This is what happened. The evidence supports it. But in other cases, you're like, actually, let me check this out. I have some intrinsic knowledge about the organization that just isn't part of the data set. And that actually changed the conclusion because of this nuanced project that's going on, right? Like those are the things that it helps an analyst do is move away from that 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 kind of very manual, gather all the information, pull all the things off the shelf, right? Make sure you didn't forget anything, and then look at it, right? Make that determination. You get right to the part where you can use your brain. And I think that's a fantastic thing.
So that brings me to another point. When you have sometimes it's spot on, sometimes it's not as it's missing a nuance. You also need to be able to feed that back into the AI, right? And train the context knowledge base because otherwise, to your point, every environment is different, every team is different, so are the goals. It only gets you so far.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the thing is like, just like we had said before, there's no magic bullet. It doesn't matter what you use, right? In this case, we just happen to be talking about AI. And the thing is, the AI doesn't just work. It works very well, but it doesn't just work. You have to take the time to train it. You have to take the time to give it the context it needs in order to eliminate some of the complexity from your completely unique network. Every network is unique. Different players, different construction, right? Different setups. Like it's all completely different. And over time, every AI model, as long as you train it properly, will start to reference that data and make better and better decisions. And like that's kind of what we have to give back, right? We've gained all this efficiency by not having to run out to these tools and copy and paste stuff and pull it together. But we have to commit some of that time back, like we talked about before, right? Do we have the cycles to do these things? This is what you make those cycles for, is to be able to take the time to be like, all right, let's look through the context memory it has. Is it right? Can we add more context? So this case came back a little off. Can I add more information so that when this stuff comes back, I know that I'm hitting that 95, 96 degree of fidelity that I can start to be like, yeah, let's give it the quick analysis. Let's review the evidence, let's take a look at the data. I'm good. Move on, close this one, right? Or take action, right? Depending on the disposition, right? Oh, actually, let's go contain this box. This is a bad day, right? Or let's go shut this account down like something happened. But that's where if you're willing to commit that time, I don't even think willing is the right word. In order to be successful in this space, you have to commit that time. And when you commit that time, that's how you become successful.
Yeah, because it creates efficiencies. Now you don't only have an employee, you have a sounding board and a partner, right? A strategic partner. But like with a human, you have to work with the AI, to your point. Otherwise, it only goes so far. And to me, you always need a human expert to then be able to continue coaching the AI, just as you would with a hire that's onboarding and what have you.
That's right. I'm sure all the people that are listening to this podcast are super senior, seasoned security operations professionals, and they know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you buy technology and turn it on and walk away, it's not going to work, and you're not secure. Right? When you start to execute blinking light security, right? We used to call that because we'd say, "Oh, server's on, green light's blinking, it's good." Right? Like if you start playing blinky light security, that's a problem. That's how you lose the game.
Yeah, interesting. So with on the AI front, is what is a common misperception, I think, when you're looking at assessing or vetting these AI tools, right? It's such a new space, new relatively speaking, but no one really knows. I mean, there are no playbooks to begin with without AI. Now we're adding AI. It's moving at the speed of light in terms of advancements.
For sure.
How do you and your peers decide what good looks like?
Man, you have all the good questions today. I can usually rattle these off, but you're making me dig deep on these. That's a great question. I think the core element right now is trust, right? Like I think that's the hard part because security operations folks, right? My colleagues, the people in this industry, the folks that are the watchers on the wall, if you will, we're kind of born out of skepticism, right? We inherently have to be skeptical all the time. We have to look at something and we have to cut through the bullshit. Be like, all right, what actually happened? Like, what evidence do I have? Like, let's really dig through this. We have to quell some of the outrage because sometimes people are like, distracting you, and you have to just kind of like blur that out, and you have to really focus. So you come from a place of trust but verify, right? You have to understand like what you're looking at. And I think that because of the speed that AI is working and because there are some companies that are applying it haphazardly, that trust is something that has to be earned, right? I can't tell you how many times I go to a random site and all of a sudden there's like an AI bot and I try to use it and it's giving me garbage data, right? Like those are the things that will cause folks like us to be like, well, how do I trust this thing? How do I know that I can smash the button and be like, this is good? How do I know that it didn't miss something, right? So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges for AI is building a system that is not going to be prone to heavy hallucination, that is going to look in the right spots for the data, that is going to put together the proper narratives or even just give you the data you're looking for. And I think there's a lot of things that companies are doing to hedge against that. And that's why I believe, especially in the AI space, there's going to be winners and losers, right? And the winners are the companies that are being thoughtful about this. Do I have the right data? Am I using the right RAG models? Do I have am I containing the AI so it doesn't go off on these tangents and so that it's being concise enough that we can trust it, but it's also given the liberty to produce a proper narrative, right? Those are the things that I think are the biggest struggles from an AI perspective. And I think just like anything else, it's going to take some time. I vividly remember when Google first came out, like I'm dating myself again. I talked about blinking lights on a server. I'm going to date myself again and talk about Google's IPO. Like when Google first came out, there were companies that blocked it. They're like, we can't allow it. They're gonna take too much of our data. People are gonna search too many terms. And they'll know what IP address it's coming from, and they'll string the data together. We can't allow that. But that's the same kind of story, right? It was a new thing. This company was indexing the entire internet multiple times a day, and you had this transformative technology that allowed you to find what you needed to find. But there were people and companies that were scared of that because of the data consumption, right? I think the trust issue, we haven't even gotten into data consumption, but I think just from an output perspective, from an AI example is I think that's the long pole in the tent today, at least for people like me in the operations space.
Yeah, making sure it's not a black box, right? And that you can see exactly the thought process it took, how it analyzed, where the data points are. Can you drill in if you want to?
I'll tell you a story about that years ago, and I'm talking years ago now. We're probably into a decade, if not longer. There was this company, and just like we talked about vendors kind of showing up, right? Our CISO was like, "Hey, I want you to look at this company. Like, they're doing some cool stuff." It's like, okay, all right. Like, what happened? What is it? And we get on a call with these folks, and they're like, "We have," and they were talking about machine learning and AI before it was a thing, right? This was like a decade ago, right? Like, we've built a platform that uses machine learning and AI to detect malware without a signature. I'm like, all right, that's cool. So how's it work? We're like, well, it's AI. It's like, all right, cool. How's it work? Right? Like, I get it. I'm with you. Like, I understand it. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, we use machine learning. Okay. Listen, I get it, right? You feed a computer 1,000 pictures of a cat. The computer starts to know, all right, triangle nose, pointy ears, long tail fur, probably a cat, right? Might not be a cat, but if it has these features, probably a cat. You do that enough times, starts to recognize a cat. I get how machine learning works, but I want to understand how does that apply back to malware that's never been observed before and is a completely new variant? Like, how does that work? And I think the guy just gave up on me. He was like, it's magic. And that's when I hung up the call.
Wrong audience to say that to.
It's magic. So I was like, okay, listen, that's when this doesn't work, right? So to your point of it can't be a black box, you're 100% right because the people that are responsible for responding to these alerts, the people that are responsible for shutting down attacks and conducting incident response need to understand how their tooling works. And if they don't understand how their tooling works, if they don't understand what that data is that they have that they need to use, well then honestly, you're just setting them up for failure. So your point of not being a black box is so on point that I just honestly, you triggered me. I appreciate it. I got on my soapbox. I will bring it back down now. Thank you.
Always happy to, like, you jump on that soapbox. So, looking at AI then, right? If the people who are using it need to understand it, obviously, and how exactly it works, when a SOC team is assessing AI tools, Who starts that process? Does it again depend on the org and what's needed and where gaps are found? Or how do you make sure that you're getting the right tool? Because at this point, we have what, 40 plus AI SOC analysts, because it seems to be lowest hanging fruit, is what some vendors say to create. But do they really have the domain expertise? Are they understanding those nuances? And everyone sounds the same, right? It's like the next gen. Hey, guess what? Autonomous SOC. And there's no such thing.
Well, I think, like, bringing it back, there's definitely no such thing, and people are still a huge part of this game, right? And I try to explain to folks that this is not a replacement. This is an augmentation, right? AI is not going to replace SOC analysts. It's going to enable them. It's going to empower them, right? This becomes a force multiplier. But to your point, like, and if I'm answering your question just by pointing back to the story I just told, we'll talk about how the tech works, right? Explain what are the models it's pulling from. Tell me where my data goes and how it's protected from training models that other people or that may be using, right? Understand what's been built from a reasoning perspective. Tell me how context memory works, right? Like those are the things that I need to understand and how it works. The wrong answer is it's magic, right? And here's the other thing is like we know that AI can get a lot of stuff wrong, right? So having clarity around how this stuff works and what resources and data sets that these things are using, right, from a retrieval, augmentation, and generation perspective, right, to be able to empower the right data sets to make the right decisions to minimize kind of those hallucinations, like, that's a powerful thing. I'll give you an example. I was working an incident once. I had it all sorted. I was curious, right? You know, like I don't want me to call out any particular companies, but I'm going to. They're like worth billions, so whatever. So I was using ChatGPT, right? I was using OpenAI, closed version, right? Like not training the model, right? We were the private version of it. So I took like my exported timeline, the logs from the exported timeline that I had, and I worked it out. This is what happened. This site got compromised. This threat actor had, put code on this legitimate site that ran an exploit kit, popped the particular vulnerability on a system. Like it took a while to figure out, but finally got it sorted. Like had my evidence of what I needed to do. I was like, no, I'm curious. Let's see what happens. Like so, I loaded the log set into the chat, and I was like, hey, there was this cyber incident that occurred. Here's what occurred. Here's the system and all this other stuff. Tell me what happened, right? And this is without all of those enrichments we just talked about, without pushing it to the appropriate data sets or having the things that it needs to reference or to the internal context. And man, this thing made up a wild story, completely off base, 100% wrong, but rightfully so. It didn't have the right context. It didn't have the right data sets to pull from, but it was very definitive. This file is bad. This thing is the thing you need to delete. It wasn't. It was some system file, right? And like that's where you get into trouble. So when you talk about like these other SOC analyst companies that are just spinning things up, right? If they're just basically wrapping other large language models, right, and not being thoughtful, and that's going to be the qualifier for me, they're going to make bad determinations, and that's a bad day. It's a bad day from a reputation perspective. It's a bad day from the ability to allow your customers to trust that your product works and even to use it. Because I'll tell you right now, this is a high stakes space, right? We're the people that miss the alert, and if we miss an alert and something happens, people get fired, right? Companies go down, like bad things happen, right? People are up for 72 hours. Like those are the things where we have a very, very low tolerance for error, right? And when error occurs, we jump on it with fierce, right? And might. So if people aren't being thoughtful about how we're rolling these things out, more importantly, how they're being used, well, that's going to generate a lot of bad days.
Yeah. And gives the other vendors a bad rep too, right? Because now the trust is deteriorating. So you're starting one level lower.
How can I use you? This other one messed up. You use the same tech. How can I trust you? You're 100% right.
And so then when we look more forward at, different roles in the SOC becoming agents, and those agents are now talking to each other.
Sure.
I'm sure you've riffed on that with your buddies. How does that change with, how do you know if it's accurate, right? What happens to the whole transparency piece there?
I think that just kind of exemplifies the trust issue, right? If I can't trust one platform, how am I going to trust seven agents, right? Like, but I want to temper this. I do think that's where the market is going, right? The market is going to series of agents that are going to be highly trained in very specific tasks. And that's positive. That's a good thing. That gives me the confidence I need. Right. But again, like the 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 proof is in the pudding, right? Like, we're gonna have to make sure that the firewall agent is able to properly block the IP address. We have to make sure that, the investigative agent is able to pull the right information back, or the whatever, the insider threat agent is able to, like, track, behavior scores or whatever, right? Like the options are limitless. But I think that at the end of the day, right, it's gonna boil down to how thoughtful were we? How well trained are those agents? Do they have the right data to pull from? Or are they gonna make things up, right? So here's an example of that not working. There are times where I'll be doing an investigation and, I'll have a SIM query that I'll write or I'll build, and I'll start looking for data and I'll be like, "Ah, man, I gotta figure something else out. Let me try to put together a query," right? Because you don't remember all the commands. And, back in the day, you'd like pour through white papers or whatever else. In this case, I was like, all right, let me ask ChatGPT or something. I was like, let me see, hey, write a query for this SIM tool looking for this data using these data sets. And it's so confident. Of course, hang on. This is what we're going to do. We're going to use this, and we're going to use this command, and we're going to pull this data set, but we're going to join it with this other data set and beautiful code. I'm like, man, this is awesome. Popped it in there. Error. Ah, okay. Well, it didn't work, right? So, all right. So I copied the error. I was like, all right, here, look, it gave me this error. And it's like, you know what? You're right. And at this point, I swear it was reasoning with me. It's like, oh, you're absolutely right. I totally didn't include this command I needed to include. Let me go and include this command. Rewrite your code. And it did it. And I popped it in there. Error. I did this 4 times before I got it to work. Right. And those are the things of where that's where this isn't going to work. But if we can solve the problem where we can build agents that do work because they're properly trained on the specific hardware, or the specific infrastructure, or the specific process, or the specific risk quantification, fill in the blank, right? Like, again, the options are limitless. And we can do that right. That's a powerful day. That's where we can really gain some scale and speed. But here's the thing I worry about. The attackers are doing the same thing, right? I do worry that this is going to turn into an arms race where it's who can build the better agents, who can build the better bots, right? And I'll date myself again, right? It reminds me of the old Mad Magazine comic, Spy vs. Spy, right? Like, you have the white spy and you have the black spy, and they're always going at each other and always trying to best each other. And that's where I think this industry is going. So we need, smart folks to build these things in a way that's going to give us a leg up and give us the capacity to just keep up at this point.
And that's really interesting because I think for those who try to use AI in-house, it's something they have to dedicate enough time when they're building it themselves to make sure it's really battle tested and solid, right? Because you won't have the same number of hours of kind of, I don't know, experience, what have you, where it's been battle tested, used in hundreds of environments to make sure it's sound. You could still build things in-house, but it won't have quite the same result because it might not be your entire focus, right?
And honestly, you need a tremendous amount of talent to do it well, right? I think that's the other thing to consider here is, look, I'm a big proponent of making good decisions in business, right? Build versus buy. Sometimes build is the right choice. Sometimes. And we've done it. There have been times we've been like, no, we're gonna build our own, we're gonna code our own thing. And then other times, buy is a better choice because of what you're talking about, right? I have now hundreds of customers feeding back into the system, and it's been out for however much amount of time, where it's been tuned and refined and it's gotten better. And, like, in some cases, that's the value, right? The value is, like, you don't have to hire a data scientist. You don't have to hire 3 people that have PhDs in AI to build your tool. You just go out and you buy the proper tools, as long as the companies you're buying them from are thoughtful, right? That's the guidance here. Don't like these, like, I get very worried when I hear things like vibe coding, like these fly by nights, right? Like, I get it. I get it. And look, it's fine. And in the right hands, again, that's a force
Attackers would
multiplier.
love the word vibe coding. They're like, "Go for it."
I know, I still cringe, right? But, like, just like anything else, it's a tool, right? And in the right hands, it's a force multiplier, but in the wrong hands, it's a bad day. And in this case, like, I think when we have platforms where people have leaned into something that works well, right? The companies that have solved a specific problem, have leaned into a niche that they're very good at. I mean, that's where it's a no-brainer, right? Why build something when you can just contribute to a much larger community?
But I think for those 40 plus vendors in the AI SOC space, it boils down to, are they rushing to get, the autonomous SOC out the door? Or are they very good with creating that kind of tier one AI SOC analyst? They perfect it. And then they will work on the next thing, right? Because you're building the trust, you're showing the mileage and all of the inner workings essentially. You're very transparent about it. So you've established yourself, your expertise, and then you move on to the next thing. And to your point, it boils down to, the PhDs with the AI expertise, but then also do they have the domain experience, right? Because I think for those VCs who are looking for those AI native companies, that's great. But it only works if you have those experts as well who have lived and breathed day in the life in the SOC, right? And have had attacks and what have you and investigations and really understand the inner workings to say, okay, now we can build the next one.
You're spot on. And for me, the way to kind of articulate this is this, right? I work with developers, right? And then I have developers that are using the same kind of AI coding tools that other people are using to vibe code, right? But the thing is, in a seasoned developer's hand, that thing has increased their output 10x, 20x, right? Because they've done it for 20 years. They understand what happens. They can figure out the problems. They can tell it when it needs to change something or go in and change the code versus the people that don't. In this case, this is the same scenario. Everyone has access to these AI tools, right? Llama model is free, right? It's open source. You can get Bedrock from Amazon. You can use OpenAI's like API. Like everyone has access to these things, right? So in that respect, the playing field is level, right? But it does come down to, have you been thoughtful about and can you leverage the experience you have in a particular space to apply it well, right? So like what I try to tell folks when I talk about this is every single person can walk into a Lowe's or a Home Depot or your local hardware store and buy every piece of material, every pipe, every wire, every tool you need to build a house. Can everyone do that? No. Just because you have access to those things doesn't mean you're going to do it well. Tools in the hands of a carpenter who's been building houses for 20 years is going to build a vastly better house than me walking into a Lowe's and buying, $200,000 worth of tools. That doesn't mean we both don't have access to the best tools, the best materials, but what that person has that I don't is that ability to learn from their experiences and apply that experience to the tools that they have at hand, right? Remember, AI is not a silver bullet. It is a tool, and in the right people's hands, it will do magical things.
But it's not magic.
Oh, it's not magic, and honestly, that's that's hila that's hilarious.
So, last question. Since there is never budget for cybersecurity tools in the first place, what do you do about an AI solution in the SOC? Are you reallocating budget? Is it a gap you're filling? How are you looking at that? Because it's not replacing humans, clearly, right? So how does that look? How do you enable your peers to say, okay, I should invest in this versus, we already don't have anything to use or a budget left over.
I think the first thing, if I'm talking to my peers directly, the first thing is make sure that you have the proper requirements for this, right? So let's assume we're past that. Let's assume you wanna lean in, you wanna provide your analyst with an AI SOC analyst so that you can have that consistency, so you can gain the efficiencies back and put them back into an analytical seat. If we're at that point, here's what I'll tell you. There's a ton of bloat in the technology space, right? Like there's a ton of things that have been bought that in some cases organizations don't even use. I've turned off many tools, right? Just because people have bought them. The use case went away, but they kept renewing the licensing. Like there's always an opportunity to find that money, right? And what I would do is I would go back to my leadership or the folks that have those purse strings. And I'd say, look, we need this. This is the immediate gain we're going to get. This is the benefit we're going to have. We're going to have this much efficiency. We're going to have this much more consistency. We're going to have, these tools working 24/7 on our behalf that are going to really allow us to carve hours into minutes and seconds. I want it, but here's what I want to give up to get it. If you need to, right? If you have a constrained budget, like I've used that tactic in the past where I've given money back with the agreement that I'm going to get to reallocate those funds onto something that I actually truly need.
And you have to show the outcome then, right? Or the potential outcome to even get the buy-in for that.
Oh yeah, I mean, at this point, I have to assume that the proper business case is there. That this is not just a kind of a rash decision. That people have talked through this, they've run through the demos, they've shown the value, right? They understand how they're going to apply to the organization. So I am making a lot of assumptions, right? But I think the other piece here is, let's say that doesn't work, right? And if it doesn't work, well, my other favorite tactic is open a risk. right? As long as you put it on paper, right? And as long as your job as a security operations professional is to articulate risk. And then once that risk is articulated, reduce the risk that you can. And the thing is, this stuff is moving faster. This stuff is moving faster. Attackers are using this stuff to exponentially move faster. Attacks are happening faster. Proofs of concepts are happening faster. Everything is starting to move at warp speed. And the organizations that are going to become the new targets are the ones that can't keep up. And the ones that can't keep up aren't leaning in to the best in class tech that's giving them the scale and scope that they need in order to do so.
So much you can say against that to push back.
I mean, it's always a conversation, right? Like it's always about, and there are plenty of times I've had a scenario where I've opened a risk, right? People have been like, yeah, cool, accepted, right? Sorry, Paul, like I'm not going to do it. But when things happen, you'd be damned if I don't point back at that risk, right? Like that's the whole point, is to be able to say, look, I did tell you about this. We did articulate that risk. Look, if an organization wants to make a business decision to accept risk, that is their prerogative. That is exactly how this was supposed to work. Cool. Your risk is number 6. I need to handle 1 to 5 first, accepted or deferred or whatever, right? But I think the reality is people understand the gravity of what's happening. And as long as my peers, as long as the folks that are in the ops space, as long as the folks that are running low security operation spaces can properly articulate the value and the benefit and the need to keep the appropriate pace, right? In order to make sure that we're keeping up with these things and also giving some of our SOC analysts some reprieve, right? Because that is one of the toughest jobs on the planet, right? We literally have an infinite tolerant for pain because we just look at these alerts all day long, right? Deal with them and to expect those folks to not make a mistake or not to become numb to certain things or to gloss certain things over, like there's a solution sitting in front of us here, and it is this transformative tech. And I would advocate, if you have the capacity and propensity, lean in now. This is the time.
Obviously, there's lots to unpack here. I could keep talking to you for hours, but we're almost out of time. So would love to give you the floor. Where can people learn more about you, speak with you, connect with you?
Oh man. Well, this will probably come out after, but I'll be at Black Hat this year, so that'll be fun. I'm sure I'll meet with a bunch of folks there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, right? So look for the bald guy. I guess there's a lot of us in IT, right? But Paul Marco on LinkedIn, you can find me there. You can also catch me on my podcast, Cyber After Hours, right? Website is chpodcast.com. Or just find us on LinkedIn there as well, and YouTube. So couple things, couple ways to find me. And if you're in the operation space, I'm sure you have all of the skill sets to do so.
And check out the podcast. It is awesome. I listened to it. Thank you, Paul, so much for being a guest. Really love the conversation and appreciate your time.
This has been an amazing time. Really appreciate chatting with smart folks like yourself. Thank you for having me on.
Enjoy Black Hat.
Thanks so much.